This is your home for the most competitive football in the state of Michigan. Your home for the most comprehensive coverage week in and week out. This is the Mac Attack with Zack and Zack.
Zack, it is always great to be down in the basement, and we are 1 week in our pocket. And man, I tell you, it was an exciting week one, and there's so many things unpredictable in our world right now, even in high school football. But one thing is for sure, the Mac Red never disappoints.
No, and it was a really solid week one outing.
Absolutely.
I think we got to see a lot from all these teams, but nevertheless, there are still unanswered questions like we talked about before. And the way week two is looking in our preview, I think we're going to know a heck of a lot more after the end of this week.
Yeah, and, Zack, we asked the folks out there in the Twitterverse what our week two game of the week should be. And I'll tell you what, man, the last time, in fact, I'll check it right now.
Yeah, let's do it in real time.
It's
let's hear where we're at.
It's 8:30 in the morning. And see, I apologize to everybody out there. Your man right here is not the smartest guy in the world. I should have set the Twitter poll to end like right now so we could tell you how it ended.
Sure, we could have real results.
But there's still like 3.5 hours left to go.
Subject to change.
Yeah, absolutely, unfortunately. But in this moment, Zack, over 400 votes, in fact, almost 450 votes, 48% of you say Romeo at Chippewa Valley should be the game of the week. Stevenson at Dakota, 47%.
Ooh.
Grosse, Pointe South, and Eisenhower at 5%. So, Zack, that's the thing. Right now,
neck and neck.
Right now, the public's game of the week is Romeo at Chippewa Valley. But again, that could change. And so you'll have to follow us at Mac Attack Pod. And next time, I promise I'll be more concise with the poll.
See where we go with this. I think we're gonna have to call it on our end because we got a show to make here. But other than that, I can't believe how close it is. And what's going on with the Eisenhower and Grosse Pointe South?
I know.
People? Are they listening, or they just don't think it's that great of a game?
I know. We need y'all out there in Grosse Pointe and in Shelby Township to hop on here and vote on the poll. But Zack, before we get into that, we haven't done power rankings in a while, and it's nice to finally be able to do these with information. We did our preview and we had our picks there, but those again were prognostications, right? Like this is something now that is informed by what we've seen on the field. And that's not to say, Zack, and you mentioned earlier that we don't have a ton of questions, because I still have a lot of questions. And of course, anybody would have questions after week one, and normally that would be okay because you're playing out of division. Right, you have a couple of games. You already had a scrimmage.
Warm up. It feels a little like preseason,
and you already had a scrimmage before that, right? But now it's like you're thrown right into the middle of it. It's like trying to jump on a treadmill while it's already moving at a high rate of speed. It's very difficult.
Yeah, don't do that.
Don't do that, right? So, Zack, let's start right from the top. Number one for me, I have Dakota, right? There's not much to say here. They impressed with a win over Chippewa Valley. Caden Sloan, DJ Stepney, that 1-2 punch on offense. And obviously what Stepney's able to do on both sides of the ball all the way around. I think we had Dakota number one coming into last week's game. I have them at number one coming out of last week's game as well. And, there wasn't really too much discussion there, not in my own head at least.
No, I hear you. What happened to the drops? Did we not have the...
Did I have the... Well, hold on. You couldn't hear that.
One. There we go. That sounds more official. I love those drops.
Dude, who let this guy in the room? I can't do anything right today. I messed up the Twitter poll.
It's all right. So I will proceed with one. I got to agree with you, Zack. Dakota, they
what a cheap podcast.
What do you expect?
I know.
Going up against Chippewa Valley in the first week, it was not going to be an easy game to win, and it was close. This was a close game by those standards, but I look at it.
Yeah, final score 29-20 in that one.
Sure. So you look at it and you say Dakota did what we expected them to do. Mm-hmm. So they're going to kind of solidify their spot there at number one. We're going to keep them on top there in the red. But their upcoming game this week for week two, this is a clash of the Titans, no pun intended, because we do have the Stevenson Titans coming in at number 2 on my list. So that's that's what we call a segue in the business here.
The biz.
But Stevenson, they got to win their first week as well. The Titan, my list is looking very similar to what it did originally.
You're not going to get a ton of. Zack, for what it's worth, my top 4 remains unchanged, and then I've got a flip at the bottom. I don't know what yours ultimately looks like, but that's. I think that in what we saw in week 1, right, with Dakota and Chippewa Valley being close, though, Chippewa Valley had their opportunities to make that game even closer and even take control. And then, you mentioned Stevenson, what they did against Eisenhower and Eisenhower's defense is exactly what we thought it was going to be. And their offense for the moment is as well. We'll get to that in a second, but it's really hard to evaluate Stevenson any deeper than that because, again, it's such a bad comp every time you have to go against. Yeah, when you watch the film against Eisenhower's defense, I mean, it's not to say that you can't learn something, you can't evaluate, but it's just, they're so overpowering. They're so experienced. It's very difficult to get anything done. You're not going to get anything past them. There are not going to be a ton of mistakes. And you saw what they did last year. You saw what they've done so far. I'm not giving Stevenson a pass. I need to see more from their offense, but I'm not gonna move them on a 7-3 win over Eisenhower. And that's the first time they had 4-game losing streak against Eisenhower. That's a big crosstown.
Absolutely. And when I'm looking at that score, I didn't see much. We didn't see a lot of offense from Stevenson. We didn't expect a lot of offense from Stevenson because we knew Ike's defense was going to be so good in week 1, which it was. And looking at it now, Stevenson having to go on the road to Dakota. We know the fans are not a factor anymore, but you still have to go on the road regardless.
I talked to a coach a couple of days ago.
Sure.
And he told me, he was an assistant coach, he told me that it's bizarre. I'm not sure it affects the players quite as much, but the coaches, there's always this chatter. You always see coaches yelling onto the field. Now, like, they're still yelling, but now everybody can hear each other. So it's like the coaches are just drowning each other out. Instead of it being crowd noise that's overwhelming, you can hear, it's like being able to hear everything all at one time.
Do you remember when UFC, they went really early into competition?
Yes.
And, they had the octagon set up in front of no crowd, and you could hear what the coaches were shouting out. Usually that's not a factor. You only had announcers and you had the chatter that was going on between coaches and the fighters, and you could hear every word of it. So this throw you off from a strategy standpoint?
Well, I tell you what, from the UFC thing you mentioned, you could also hear like knuckles on fist. It was something else, man. I didn't. I missed the crowd noise at that point.
I think we all missed the crowd noise. I mean, to be honest with you, even watching the NFL and how they do it, like,
not well. They don't do it well.
It doesn't react the same way, and it feels low energy. It really does.
Yeah. And you asked, does it affect? Ultimately, I don't think so. I mean, at least not a ton. Like I said, I think the kids in the field, maybe this is too much of a sports aphorism, but it's like you get that tunnel vision, right? And you really can't see or hear anything else other than what's happening in front of you. But I do think it has to affect you in some way, just because you get so used to playing football a certain way for so long, your whole life, really, right? I mean, you go to Pop Warner games and it's not quiet.
Right.
No, I mean, and so I do think that people say, well, we don't notice it. Like, impossible.
Yeah. No,
are you able to overcome a slight change that doesn't really affect what happens on it's not like the field is now sloped downhill where they're like, wait a second, I don't know how to, it doesn't actually, what's happening.
2020 is not over yet.
And that's not,
it's still happening.
I know what's happening doesn't happen on the field.
Right.
And so I do think, that it does make an impact, but I do think it is minimal. We'll see going forward. I mean, again, with one game in, everything right now is so different, right? But I haven't heard a ton of complaints. The coach that I spoke to said it wasn't a complaint. It was more just like
a little Twilight Zone.
Yeah, bizarre. Yeah.
And I totally get that, but Stevenson, number 2 on the power rankings this week, and they've got a tough matchup coming up at Dakota.
3.
Look, we just talked about this game. Zack, still have Eisenhower in this spot. That was a tough week 1 loss. They had a tough week 1 loss last year. So remember, going into this week, going into last week, I said, I thought Eisenhower might struggle. They did it in week 1 last year. So if I'm going to ding them for that, I have to, going forward, give them the credit that I gave them last year for how they recovered from it, and I have to assume for now that they'll do the same thing. I don't know if they will. Now, Zack, your argument has been, and I agree with it, that Eisenhower had more time last year to figure things out. They had a veteran quarterback as well and Blake Rastig a year ago. Again, that veteran leadership helped them offensively. But they've got to hurry, Zach.
Yeah.
But I think that defense, I do think will carry. If you can keep Stevenson to 7, they've got athletes all over the place. I mean, especially Jordan Ramsey. And I think if you can keep them to 7, you're going to be able to keep a lot of teams in that ballpark, or less.
Yeah, and I think, Zach, for me, this is where we
split last time,
and I'm going to do the same this go around because nothing much is changing for me. I'm going to keep Chippewa Valley at 3, and I'm keeping them at 3.
If I had them at 3, I wouldn't move them.
Yeah, so I'm going to keep them there as well because to see what they did against what we're saying on this podcast is the top team in the red.
And what really beat them in that game was themselves. They had a lot of mental mistakes down the stretch, and those are things that they can control going forward. So, yeah.
And I think they will, correct that. And this is a good, solid program that, when I put them at 3, I kind of expect them to go up from there, but I can't at this stage. With a first,
well, of course you
they
expect
lost
them to
their
go
first
up.
game. But now they've got Romeo, who's coming off of a tough loss, playing Grosse Pointe South last week. They're both neither one of these teams want to be 0-2.
Right. And we'll get into that because, that to me makes the Romeo game with Chippewa Valley so interesting. So, Zach, I have Eisenhower at 3. You have Chippewa Valley there.
4.
Now, again, we flip-flopped here, and this is where it lands for me. This is not the same Chippewa Valley team from the past few years, Zach, but that's okay. You're not going to be able to be the same team over and over and over again. And even from 18 to 19, we're talking about a different team. But I guess what I mean by being different than the last couple of years and putting those two together is like the just sheer dominance. Chippewa Valley had a stranglehold on a really good division. They
didn't lose a game last year in the regular season.
Or the year before that.
Man, that's impressive.
10 games in a row, right? 2-time, back-to-back, undefeated MAC Red champions. Right?
It's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
It's
a huge deal. And the first season where that happened culminated in this Division I state championship.
Not too shabby.
It is the holy grail. An undefeated season, Division I state championship. That's
rare.
it.
That's rare.
It's the holy grail of why kids show up to play, right?
Couldn't have done better.
I'm not saying this team can't win a championship, but they're not going to walk on. I think I saw last week in the NFL, it was the first time in I don't know how many years Tom Brady was the quarterback at New England, but it was the first time the Patriots weren't favored going into a game in years and years and years and years, right? And, Chippewa Valley is going to have to go through that right now. Where it doesn't mean they can't win those games. Doesn't mean they shouldn't win those games. But again, that overall dominance is, for now, not theirs.
They're going to be feeling some pressure this season.
That's right, and it's going to be a different kind of pressure,
yeah.
Right? From different angles that maybe they're not used to. But this team is so well coached. They have so much talent. They're always so deep that I'm not concerned. And you say, well, Zach, you've got them at 4. I'm like, yeah, I've got them at 4 in the red. Zach, you said it last week. You could flip the list upside down. Now, not this week. I don't think you could. But last week,
right.
You could have flipped the list upside down.
And we could have had an argument.
Yes.
We could have had a discussion about it.
So I have Chip at 4. Zach, for you?
Yeah.
3.
Whoops. See, dude, I'm just...
4.
Is there a door? It's over there, right? That's where I leave?
All right. We'll be taking applications for Zach's spot. Just follow us on Twitter.
But you have to have your name also has to be Zach, though, because we have signs and stuff.
That costs money. I got Eisenhower at number 4 on my list this week. And, that's just because, I impressed by the defense, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Holding Stevenson to 7 points for the game. That's what we were expecting, but we were expecting more from their offense because they had to do something in that situation to pull off a win. Your defense can only do so much, and
if your defense holds to 7, you got to get 8.
Yeah, and you're going to come across these teams like the Chippewa Valley football squad that they're not putting up as many points offensively as they were last year, but give it time. That'll happen.
Right.
And how can you're not going to be able to have those performances week in and week out
and
without a little help from your offense.
And you have that fifth game. It doesn't come in this order, but that fifth game now is so much more challenging with Grosse Pointe South. So it makes every game outside of that game that much more important, right?
Absolutely. So I still need to see what this offense is capable of until we see more. It's going to be hard for me to make them move on my list.
Yeah, and I mean, look, you have your top 4 the same. I have mine too. I don't think inside of the top 4 after week 1, I'm not sure, no matter how you had it, I'm not sure you could make a change. Right. I don't know why. I don't know if you'd have seen anything that would have motivated in the top 4 to make a change. 4, yeah. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Your top 4 stayed and so did mine. And that's my point is nothing that I saw in the first 4 had any thought for me to move. I take that back. I did think about, because 3 and 4 did not win, I thought about, but these aren't standings.
It's a toss-up, yeah.
But they're not standings. These are power rankings, right? You don't have to go based on wins and losses. That's what makes these a little more fun, because they're a little more arbitrary.
5.
You see that?
Nailed it.
5.
I got one more time just because. Now, Zach, I did have motion here. And I mean, there was no question about this, right? I don't think anybody looks at that and says, oh my God, I can't believe. I still have questions about Grosse Pointe South, but I have no doubt that they played much better than Romeo did last week. I mean, obviously, you win 24-14. You did some things correct, and your opponents certainly made mistakes, and we'll talk about some of those mistakes that Romeo made in a minute. But this is about Grosse Pointe South. And look, if you're coming into the red, this is how you do it.
Yeah.
You start with a win.
It's a great debut.
You start with a win, and that's what they did. I've got them at 5. I think you could argue to have them as high as 3 because they won. But to me, that's not an argument I'm buying.
Yeah, so we basically have 2 teams that started the season off with a loss, ranked higher than Grosse Pointe South, who got a win. Now, I think if it would have been Grosse Pointe South beating a team like Stevenson or Eisenhower from the get-go, we would have seen a little more movement on that end, but it's not. It was the team that was previously in our number 5.
This is a flip.
And to see guys like Will Johnson come out and not even have a strong game, but still end with an impressive win for the team. But my argument here is I don't know how much of it was a Grosse Pointe win versus just a breakdown in Romeo's game.
Well, we're going to find out over time.
Yeah, well, and especially coming up, I mean, the battle of the defenses for next week, for Grosse Pointe South and Eisenhower. But, I have a hard time. That's why I say we didn't have a lot of answers first week, because these matchups, aside from telling me that Grosse Pointe South has the edge on Romeo, I didn't get much else out of that. So I think this is where it becomes more impactful, and this is where we see more of an opportunity for some of these teams to move within the Mac Attack power rankings.
And I don't think that it's not that Will Johnson didn't have a good game. He ended up with a touchdown. He had an interception. He wasn't super impactful. And I think the part of that is because of what you're saying, is that a lot of the movement in the game was because Romeo, I mean, they had 2 turnovers inside of the red zone on the road in a MAC red game, and you can't do that. So let's just
6.
Right? I mean, Zack,
I was just going to say,
can't do that.
No, with Will Johnson too. He didn't necessarily have to have a good game.
No, he didn't
to win that game. Like there's times where sometimes you got to be the quiet guy in the room. You know what I mean? Sometimes you just gotta do your role. And he didn't have to step up and do anything that was ultimately super impressive,
because Romeo made all kinds of mistakes. I think they have 4 turnovers, I believe, and again, 2 of those coming inside the red zone. I mean,
5 total.
5 total. You cannot make those kinds of mistakes, no matter where you are or when it is. But certainly when you're on the road and behind, those are mistakes you cannot make. And the passing game, we saw Romeo throw a little more than we're used to. Still, I think it was only 15 times, but Romeo last year, you throw it 8, 9 times, right? They had so many running backs, and this year they do too. They not as many as a year ago, but still. And that they just weren't able to be as efficient. I wonder about the offensive line. You made a great point in the last podcast about how important certainly that is, and
a little on the younger side,
right? And how good Romeo's was a year ago. So I mean, I've got Romeo at the bottom here. It's not a place they're used to. Maybe it's not a place they're going to stay. They've got to bounce back. And look, this is going to be a dogfight, no pun intended there. But I mean, somebody's going to go 0-2 here, and it's 2 teams that, look, everybody makes the playoffs this year. So, look, if this was a different situation, it would be like
That's part of my that's part of my argument with this, and not that these games don't matter. At the end of the day, there's only going to be one MAC Red champion, but
that's right.
I'm not going to look back and dwell on a Grosse Pointe South loss if I can make a deep run in the playoffs. I mean, really, the only thing your goal at this point for this season is just to stay healthy.
Yeah,
and I'm not talking just from a injury standpoint. I'm talking from COVID and making sure that everybody's operating safely, because
you've got to play 4 games to make the playoffs. So you've got to get out there through 4, right?
Yeah,
so
that's it.
Stay healthy.
You're almost halfway there, guys. So, we're getting down to this point where I'm going to use this time as a coach, as a team, as whatever to work on those things that we need to work on and treat these games.
And I think that's
like a dry run for the playoffs.
No coach would ever admit it, and I understand why. And I think ultimately they wouldn't admit it because they maybe even if that is what's happening, they don't ultimately see it that way. They see it as the means to an end. Like the goal always is to make a deep run. Now, in a normal year, a series of equations will get you to a deep run. Coaches start small, right? It's like, all right, we want to beat. If we're Chippewa Valley, right? We want to beat Dakota. There's number 1. All right. And it's like, well, if we beat Dakota, we'll probably have a good shot at winning the MAC Red, right? And you're like, all right, great. If we win the MAC Red, we'll definitely make the playoffs. There's 3 goals, but I only started with this 1, right? Then if you do all those things, like, hey, you could probably win a couple games in the playoffs. And hey, if you get a couple games in the playoffs on your belt, why can't you win the next 2?
You're not too far off at that point.
But it only started with beating one team. And you see how that spirals. And so that's how a goal progression works. But in this season, Zach, that's shattered because it's
different.
You could still think that way, but not everybody's going to be thinking that way because, again, we don't live in the same world that we did. And ultimately we'll be back. I don't know, who knows what normal will be after this, but certainly to full seasons and where these conversations mean a little more. But Zach, you're right. Everything is so different that it's just how coaches are approaching this season.
It's uncharted territory.
It's like Yahtzee, dude. Throw the dice in the cup and just shake them out. What happens?
Yeah, well, you still want there's bragging rights here.
I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but the long-term goals look a little differently, and how you get there certainly look a lot differently.
Yeah.
Because of the way things look.
Luckily for Romeo, they've got that we're only 1 game in. And I'm going to chalk that up to a fluke, but losing to Grosse Pointe South, the new guys in the MAC Red, I can't put them anywhere but 6 at this point.
No, and look, Zach, your point is correct for Eisenhower, for Chippewa Valley, and for Romeo. It's 1 loss. There's a full season still basically in front of you. It's shorter, but it's still there. So, Zach, let's get into week 2 and our game of the week. And it may not match up with what the fans say, but we have to call it the way we see it. But we encourage you to vote. And tell us that we're wrong, right? You can follow us on Twitter.
That's what Twitter's for, telling people they're wrong.
It's the only reason that we're there. So, Zach, our game of the week, and again, I know that it's split on Twitter, but to me, there wasn't really a conversation here. I understand why everybody thinks their game is the game of the week, but Stevenson and Dakota here. I mean, we've got these 2 teams at 1 and 2, and I think if you look around the Metro Detroit publications, it's about the same. If you look at the way it shakes out, I don't think it's much of a question that there's 1, there's 2. There's a gap, there's 3, there's 4, maybe there's another gap, there's 5, there's 6. I think to me that's what it looks like right now. But to me, Stevenson at Dakota, and here's the thing, we don't have to wait too long. Are we going to get all the answers to all the questions? No. But we're certainly going to find out when best comes to best how iron sharpens iron here. I'm really looking forward to this game. So to me, there is no question, Stevenson at Dakota, game of the week all over it.
Yeah, I got to agree with you on that one, Zach. There are number 1 and number 2 in the power rankings.
Right.
So we're either going to see a Dakota team that is solidifying its spot at number 1, or we're going to see a Stevenson team that says, hey, guys, not so fast. We're going to be number 1 in the red, and we're going to hold on to that seat for the rest of the season because now everybody would be gunning for them. I mean, this is the way the scheduling is working out is starting to work to our advantage at this point where we get to see a whole lot more.
Right.
So I understand why it was so split on Twitter, but at the same time, in Macomb County, right now, breaking it down in the red, I think you got to go with Stevenson at Dakota for your game of the week.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to give people a reason to not listen to next week's podcast, but I mean, when we do power rankings next week, I can promise you how number one's going to look. Whoever wins this game will be at the top. There's no question. And so to me, like, that has to be that, because it doesn't matter who wins. They will be number one.
Right.
And so to me, that automatically makes it the game of the week. And, I still have a couple of questions about Stevenson's offense. I think they have the answers. Again, I think it's very difficult to show that when you're playing a team like Eisenhower. If you can get yourself on the board, you're feeling pretty good about yourself.
Yeah.
And from there, if your defense can hold, and that's what we saw. I don't have a ton of questions about Dakota, right? I mean, I need to see if they can continue to do what they did against Chippewa Valley, against a team like Stevenson, right? Can they continue to control the clock? Because if you can keep the ball out of Stevenson's hands, and that's true for any opponent, but certainly one that has so much talent offensively like Stevenson does, to me it comes down to ball control. Can Dakota do what they did last week? And you look at Sloan and Stepney and the way that worked, the momentum they got. The Stevenson will struggle if that happens. Zach, I'm taking Dakota in this one. It's in Macomb Township. It's at Dakota. I'm going with the Cougars.
Yeah, I made the mistake last week of picking nothing but road teams. And it was, you pointed out how poor of a strategy that was.
I warned you about that.
And, I only went 1-2 in my picks. I can't go against Dakota at home. So I'm going to pick Dakota as well for this one. Stevenson always surprises me. It's one of those.
It's been kind of their thing lately.
And out of all the teams in the red, I would say they're probably that team that I always maybe don't give enough credit to, and then they surprise me. So I'm not guaranteeing my pick. If I was a betting man, I'm not going to. Is that
what that was?
Yeah, but this is going to be a great game regardless. I was trying to look up where we can stream this game because I think it's going to be a really entertaining one.
So I think you'll be able to see it on Dakota. So Chippewa Valley has a YouTube page. That's where I watched. Okay. That's where I watched Chippewa at Dakota last week. And by the way, Zach, I'm glad you said that. If you're listening to this podcast and you have links, you have knowledge of where these games can be watched, always, any week, anytime, tweet us links to where we can watch these games.
Yeah.
Because, look, we're still going to try to get out, but we've learned that we can, even if we don't make it out, we can still monitor all these games at once. And I really enjoyed that last week. So please, if you have links, send them our way. So, Zach, you're taking Dakota. I'm taking Dakota. Zach and I in agreement in our game of the week pick. And, again, the conversation between the two games, Romeo and Chippewa Valley, was the other half of that coin. And, Zach, this game is a biggie in a different way, right? The first game we're talking about fighting for early supremacy. The second game is about not getting put in the early hole, right? Because the loser goes to 0-2. Both have to come away asking a lot of questions after last week in a variety of aspects, especially offensively. Not so much for Chippewa Valley, but again, the mental mistakes, the bad snaps down the stretch. For Romeo, the turnovers, both of them made far more mistakes than we're used to seeing either program make. And I think that those are things that they can overcome. I just don't know if they. I don't know if they will overcome.
Yeah, they might need another. This is not going to be an easy opponent to work out some of those kinks. You know what I mean?
Oh, and you're back against the wall right now too.
And like you said, nobody wants to be 0-2. Nobody wants. The one thing you didn't want to do, you didn't want football to be canceled, and the second thing you want to start 0-2. But the Bulldogs, they've got a long ways to go, I think. I think this is going to be a tough start for them.
I'm surprised how concerned I am about them.
And not only that, going on the road again for the second week in a row. They haven't been at Barnabo yet, which is, we know, things change when you start playing at Barnabo Stadium. But I got to take Chippewa Valley in this one. It's no doubt in my mind that Chippewa Valley is going to start to pick up their game a little bit. Last week was tough, but they also played a very good team. So I think that we're going to see Chippewa Valley go to 1-1 on the season, and the Bulldogs unfortunately dropped to 0-2.
Yeah, I'm taking Chippewa Valley, Zach, in this one as well. Romeo looked too lethargic in this one. In the last week, they didn't look ready, and I was so surprised And again, all of these things that we're talking about are something that they can themselves overcome. They have the ability, they have the power to do that. But I, too, am taking Chippewa Valley over Romeo, that game at Chippewa Valley. And Zack, Grosse Pointe South at Eisenhower. It took a while for their offense to get going in week 1. They won't have that luxury this week. Whenever you can get on the board, you got to score. Yeah. Anytime you get close to an opportunity to score against Eisenhower, you have to seize it. That means no turnovers. That means a high conversion rate on 3rd down and possibly on 4th down as well. You have to be a little more risky. The good news is for Grosse Pointe South, that because they have the athlete to be able to, if they need to, really push the issue on the outside, because we know that Eisenhower's strength, to me, is in the linebacking core and then up front. I'm not saying that the defensive backs are not without talent, but the strength is in the center. So if you can stretch them defensively, your chances of getting on the board are a lot better.
Yeah, and Grosse Pointe South put up 24 points in the second half last week against Romeo. So we know they can score. We know they can execute on the offensive end if need be, but this is a different defense that they're going up against. You saw even with those 24 points, Grosse Pointe South struggled on 3rd down. They struggled. Their conversion rate was low for 3rd down, and I don't think you go up against a defense like Eisenhower and convert on 3rd down the way they did and still win the game. It's not going to be like Romeo. This is going to be a little bit of a different game for them, but I'm interested to see how their offense does respond to this. Is it going to be an offensive showcase like it was last week, or is the defense from Grosse Pointe South going to be the story? But Ike, your offense, you can shut down Grosse Pointe South. You still got to put points on the board. Yeah. The 3 points like last week is not going to cut it.
No, it's not. Zack, this is the game about which I'm the least comfortable, because I'm just not exactly sure what I'm going to see because of the way they both played in week 1. I probably should take Grosse Pointe South because of the momentum, but I'm sticking with the defense. I'm taking Eisenhower. The game is in Utica, I think, or Shelby Township. I'm taking Ike's defense. But I really do think this game can go either way, but you got to pick them, and I'm taking Eisenhower.
Yeah, I concur. Ike is the team that I'm taking in this game. It's so tough because, you pick these teams and you don't really, you're not picking it on much. You know what I mean? You're picking it off of a first week performance.
We didn't get scrimmages. We haven't been able to talk to players and coaches we normally would. It's only week 1 still, even though it feels like we're in week 5. Like, you're absolutely right, man.
Yeah. So we didn't get those warm up games or the preseason games, as we like to call it. So once again, not confident in my pick, but I'm going to take Eisenhower anyway.
Yeah. No, I feel the same way. So Zack, just to run it down, you and I in agreement across the board this week. We have Dakota over Stevenson, Chippewa Valley over Romeo, and Eisenhower over Grosse Pointe South. All of those games, 7 o'clock this Friday. If you have links, send them our way. We're going to find them anyway, but you could help us out a little bit. And always, when you're at these games, tweet us pictures, scoring drives, whatever. Like we always love hearing from you all out there, and we know that the crowds are limited, but I do know that some of you obviously are.
The parents are out there listening.
The parents are still out there.
Share as much as you can, because we're missing that fandom from
I know
from last year.
Yeah, that is one thing that on our end that has been weird, just kind of doing things from further away than what we got used to last year. So Zack, we will be back on Saturday. As always, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, 32andmain.com. Everybody, good luck in week 2, and remember, stay healthy.
Thanks for listening to the Mac Attack with Zack and Zack. For more, visit 32andmain.com. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Mac Attack Pod. And don't forget to like the Mac Attack with Zack and Zack on Facebook. The Mac Attack is a proud member of the 32 and Main Network.